tasty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the live desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Co, we tackle the issues of the day with real robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app, and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
A very good morning to you. It is Friday the 13th of October and 9:30 a.m. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Eddie Costello and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up today.
24 hours to evacuate. Israel is telling everyone in North Gaza to relocate to the south of the Strip. That means 1.1 million people have to flee their homes. But where do they go? We'll have the latest.
Sunak's military support. The UK will send 2 Royal Navy ships and surveillance aircraft to the Middle East in order to bolster security. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps spoke to GB News this morning about why the UK is taking this action.
By surveillance, provide the potential for humanitarian aid, but also to act as a deterrent in the wider region.
Get a grip. That's what the Prime Minister told police chiefs to do when it comes to tackling anti-Israel hate. This comes as 2 Jewish schools in London said they were closing to protect their pupils.
And in lighter news, today is World Egg Day. It's the time that we all adopt is it time that we adopt the vegan way of life and ditch eggs completely from our diets? Well, we'll debate that soon.
Well, as always, we love to hear from you, so do keep us company this morning. GBnews at gbnews.com. But first, let's get a news bulletin with Tamsin.
Ellie, thanks very much and good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 9:31. Israel has told the United Nations the 1.1 million residents of Gaza City should move to the south within the next 24 hours. The UN says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. It says Israel should rescind the order to avoid turning tragedy into calamity. But the Foreign Office in the UK is advising people to follow the advice. The siege of Gaza continues, with Palestinian authorities saying more than 1,500 people have now been killed. Israel is retaliating against the Hamas terror group after an unprecedented wave of attacks at the weekend. The group killed 1,300 people and took over 100 hostages, including British nationals. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defence Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, with IDF troops bracing for the militant group Hezbollah to open up a second front in the war. Here, the UK is sending spy planes and 2 Royal Navy ships to the eastern Mediterranean to support Israel's fight against Hamas. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak spoke to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reiterate the UK's support for the war against the terrorist group. The aircraft are beginning patrols today and will track threats such as the transfer of weaponry. The Prime Minister is also in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders at the summit are expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering's been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Rishi Sunak reminded the summit that they are the first in line of defence across much of the region. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks in Israel. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Mr. Musk says the Commission has not provided any examples. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. Well, those are the top stories, and you can get more on all of them. Just visit our website, gbnews.com. Now, though, it's back to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks so much, Tamsin. It's 9:34, and we start this programme with some live pictures of Gaza.
Yes, the conurbation in the south of the Arabian Peninsula. There, we can see Israel is telling everyone in North Gaza, of course, that's around 1.1 million people, to relocate to the south of the Strip in the next 24 hours. That's according to the United Nations.
Yes, so 1.1 million people. That would be around 40,000 people per hour moving to the south of the country.
And Israel's military has told Gaza City residents directly to leave for their own safety and protection. That was in a leaflet drop in the last 24 hours. This is as Israeli forces mass ahead of an expected ground invasion imminently.
Yeah, we can see those pictures there inside Israel of that preparation on the border of Gaza. There could be a ground offensive starting this weekend. At least that's what some of the papers have been reporting. And there are still around 140 hostages being held in Gaza. 1,300 people are known to have died at the weekend during those deadly attacks on Israel. And those hostages will be one of the priorities for the IDF making their way into Gaza.
But of course, the United Nations has called on Israel to withdraw its order to evacuate, arguing that it's impossible for Palestinians to fully comply with the warning, and indeed warning themselves of devastating humanitarian consequences.
The Israeli army has actually dropped leaflets into the Gaza Strip telling Palestinians to leave their home or risk being killed as Israel continues to rain down missiles on the Hamas-controlled territory. But it must be confusing for the people in Gaza City, especially because Hamas are telling them to stay put.
Now, closer to home, the United Kingdom will send 2 Royal Naval vessels and surveillance aircraft into the Middle East in order to bolster security.
Well, the Defence Secretary Grant Shapps told GB News why earlier.
Provide surveillance, provide the potential for humanitarian aid, but also to act as a deterrent in the wider region that others who might want to get involved in, at the moment, what is essentially a terrorist organization having attacked Israel and Israel's response. And we don't want to see other organizations thinking, oh, this is an opportunity to exploit that situation. So Britain's sending that assistance.
Well, Grant Shapps there, the new Defence Secretary. Joining us to discuss this in further detail is the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood. Tobias, thank you for making the time for us this morning. First of all, I suppose 2 ships, some surveillance helicopters. Is this anything more than gesture politics?
I think it's a start. I think it's very important to show, as Grant Shapps was explaining, an interest. We have a huge amount of influence still in the Middle East. We understand it as well. And I think it's been absolutely right that we stand by Israel. Hamas's intent is very, very clear indeed. War with Israel. Fight using any means, however barbaric, and widen the conflict beyond Gaza. So it's quite right that the UK, US, and the West stands by Israel as it faces the biggest security threat since the state was formed. But Israel and the West, much as we want to see Hamas neutralized and defeated, having seen its barbaric terrorist actions, Hamas has actually removed its right to participate in representing Gaza and indeed the Palestinians any further. But I make the point that the scale of the planning that Hamas has displayed to date suggests that they are deliberately provoking Israel to launch that ground attack, to enter Gaza. And we are entering uncharted territory. We need to be thinking not just operationally, but strategically too. Not thinking 1 chess move ahead, but 4 or 5, and recognizing there will be major consequences to a ground attack. And we have to ask ourselves, does this help or hinder the overall mission to remove Hamas? My worry is that this is deliberately going to escalate beyond the West Bank, beyond eastern Jerusalem, beyond Lebanon, and indeed elsewhere. And I fear that we are falling into a trap because Hamas has no care, no interest to represent those 2 million Palestinians in Gaza. It wants a ground war. It wants this war to spread. It wants Palestinians and Arabs far away from the Middle East to support its cause. And I think it's only a matter of time before we see serious unrest in a Western capital. We already see tensions rising. So I think we need to be really clear what the mission is. The removals, the surgical removal and replacement of Hamas, and the isolation of its paymasters, Iran, that we do not spend enough time talking about. Because vengeance alone, although understandable, is not a strategy.
But Mr. Ellwood, Hamas don't wear uniforms, so how can the Israelis distinguish between them and civilians living in Gaza? We're hearing in many of the papers this morning that Hamas terrorists are living in tunnels beneath Gaza, or they're embedded with civilians in high-rise tower blocks. I mean, it's actually going to be impossible, isn't it, to eliminate them?
Well, eliminate by force, potentially. There are other slower methods of doing this. And absolutely right, we mustn't deter from that mission. But I make it really, really clear that fighting in built-up areas is the most dangerous form of warfare that favors the insurgent with all the tunnels and systems that they actually have. The Israeli Defense Forces are formidable, there's no doubt about it. But this will be the sort of street fighting that will be so costly. Hamas, as I say, has been preparing for this with their tunnels and their weapon systems. And unless you're going to aerial bomb from height, in which case you're going to destroy 1 million homes, you then own that problem in Gaza afterwards. And if I can just add as well, the rise of extremism, an impressionable young Muslims indoctrinated to join Hamas's cause will escalate. We've seen this. We saw this after 9/11. And in fact, yesterday was the anniversary of the Bali bombing in 2002. My brother was killed there a year after the 9/11 attacks, away from the United States, away from Afghanistan, away from the Middle East, killed in Indonesia. I know this, perhaps even unpopular to say so. Absolutely, I lean in with Israel. I'm pleased what Britain is doing. I'm really concerned that we are being lured into a trap which will have huge consequences for Middle East security and way beyond the Middle East as well.
You speak very powerfully about the aftermaths of 9/11, and I'm sorry to hear about your brother, but going further to this escalation idea, to what extent can the finger of blame be pointed at Iran for all of this? Perhaps for coordination, for support militarily, tactically? And to what extent was the potential normalisation of Israeli relations with Saudi Arabia the instigator for all of this chaos?
Looks as though we may have, some connection issues there with Tobias Ellwood. Really interesting what he was saying there about the aftermath of 9/11, that if you go in and kill terrorists, you in fact can create many more.
Well, I suppose it's so tricky in terms of how you do it. There seems to be such international consensus in the Western world that the Israelis have the absolute right to get their hostages back and to target those people who parachuted in to kill innocent civilian people at a music festival, who've been slaughtering babies in their beds, burning Jews alive. Clearly Israel has a right to go in there. The question is, how far do they go, I suppose, and to what extent is that going to create repercussions? To what extent will other countries in the Middle East pour in, and will this grow into a bigger security problem?
And Tobias Ellwood there touching upon his concerns, actually. It is a very densely built area, the Gaza Strip, one of the most densely populated areas in the world. And he is very concerned that if there is a ground offensive, the loss of life that there would be on both sides of this conflict. I suppose the question is, are there any good military options, or would it just become a quagmire?
And of course, we can remember back 50 years ago, almost the day, the Yom Kippur War, where all of those countries surrounding Israel went in, and then Israel, of course, pushed back. Are we going to see something on that scale? And how would that reverberate around the world? Will that drag in American troops? Will this be something that becomes so much bigger? There are many, many questions which are as yet unanswered.
Yes, there are. Please do let us know what you make of this ongoing story. GBViews at gbnews.com.
Closer to home, 4 Jewish schools in North London are now closing out of fear for the safety of their children.
Yes, it comes as schools warn Jewish students to disguise their uniforms in fear of attacks caused by the ongoing war in Israel. Well, we're joined now by Chief Executive Campaign Against Anti-Semitism, Gideon Falter. Very good to see you this morning, Mr. Falter. I mean, this is reminiscent, isn't it, of 1930s Germany, when children can't wear the Star of David on their chest for fear of being seen as a Jew in public.
I mean, thank God we're living in very different times to the time of the Holocaust. And you know, the thing, though, that we do need to make clear is that closing Jewish schools is a really serious step. And I've just heard from friends who dropped their kids off at school this morning at Jewish schools that were open, and they were saying something like 70%, their estimate of the children hadn't been brought into school that day because of parents' fears. And it is, what's just happened in Israel, this atrocity, this terrorist atrocity, has reverberated around the Jewish world, not only in the sense that so many of us have lost people that we know and love, or still waiting for news on them, but also that Jewish communities around the world are used to there being this massive uptick in anti-Semitism every time there's fighting there. And there was already a really serious situation, anti-Semitic crime at a really high level in the UK. British Jews already having felt fearful over the last few years, and now to suddenly get to this point where Jewish schools are closing, Jewish children are being told to take off their skull cap, take their school uniforms off, and replace them with something that doesn't identify them as going to a Jewish school. It's a really concerning time.
It's absolutely shocking. And of course, at the start of this morning, we thought it was just 2 schools that were closing. Now it's 4. This may be growing. In Amsterdam, many schools are closed too.
To what extent is this related to what the former leader of Hamas has been saying in recent hours about a global day of jihad against Jews?
I think this is what feeds into it. The whole point of terrorism is to terrorize people. It's to terrorize people by killing them, and it's terrorize people by sowing fear. And Hamas actually says in its charter, in its founding charter, that final day will not come until the Jews are annihilated. Part of its entire purpose is to annihilate Jews. But through the terrorism that it perpetrates, it also seeks to spread fear. And as far as I know, there wasn't any specific intelligence about a threat to Jewish schools in the UK. The problem is that when we get pronouncements like this and we see people celebrating Hamas on the streets of the UK, Jewish parents sending their children to Jewish schools start to think, are we actually safe? Are we actually being looked after? You know, there was that horrendous demonstration outside the Israeli embassy this week, which saw people launching fireworks and singing this genocidal chant about Israel, from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free. This is a Hamas chant, a Muslim Brotherhood chant, which basically calls for the genocide of all Jews between the River Jordan and the Mediterranean Sea. And the next day, the Metropolitan Police issued a statement saying that they didn't see anything that they thought they should be getting involved with. So it's kind of understandable, isn't it? That if you're a Jewish parent, you're seeing that kind of person, that kind of protest out on the streets of London, and the next day the police are saying they're going to do nothing, and there's a call for jihad by Hamas, it's understandable that the fear might start to get to you. And that's the really dangerous thing, is that even without lifting a finger, it can start to put Jewish community in total fear in this country.
And Gideon, as you were speaking there, we saw pictures and videos of those demonstrations that you describe outside the Israeli embassy. I just wanted to show you, I'm sure you've already seen it, but for our viewers and listeners, there's a video that's gone viral on social media of two Muslim women who are taking down pictures in London, posters of missing children in Gaza. Hopefully we can just show you this clip, which has gone viral on social media. We're just going to get that up for you now.
Why don't you do something for Palestine? Why don't you? This is for Palestine. They're not mutually exclusive. It's children. It's children. It's innocent people. Okay, what about the children in Palestine? That's not. It doesn't make it. Why? Jesus.
So just for the benefit of our radio listeners, we can see two Muslim girls there taking down those posters of missing children in Gaza. And there's a bystander there saying these are innocent children. Gideon, what's your reaction to that video?
Honestly, it's really, really upsetting and horrifying. These are posters showing children, babies, some of them, who were kidnapped by Hamas terrorists and taken into captivity in Gaza. And I don't want to be graphic about what that's going to be like for them, but it is horrendous. And Israelis and Jews in London, who some of them are relatives of these families, don't have anything they feel they can do. And so they do the one thing they think they can do, which is to raise awareness by putting posters up. And I have friends who were involved in doing this. And they put these posters up around London, trying to draw attention to the fact that these babies and children are in captivity of terrorists. And for two people to react to that in the way that those two women did by tearing those posters down is absolutely despicable.
So what does it actually say? That there are people who feel so confident, so brazen to walk the streets of London, not only chanting that Jews should be pushed into the sea. Audio. I think we're having some problems here with our audio. But Ellie, I mean, I've seen these videos, and I'm sure many people at home will have seen these viral videos, not just of people tearing down posters. There was one, a Jewish man was in a shop and a woman ran up to him saying, "Oh, are you sad? Are you sad that Jews are dying?" Mocking him. It was extraordinary that this is going on in London.
It makes you despair for humanity, doesn't it? I mean, even in that video there, you just think, where is your humanity? We are talking about children, innocent children and babies. No matter where your politics lie, you think you'd have some humanity with that, wouldn't you? Well, Lisa Hartle has been speaking with the Jewish community in North London about anti-Semitism and their fears after Saturday's attacks. And she's live for us now in Golders Green. Good morning to you, Lisa. And what's the feeling of on the ground there of people at the Jewish community?
Good morning. Well, Golders Green has a large Jewish community, and I've been speaking with people here today and throughout the week, and they're all saying the same thing, that they're heartbroken over the conflict, but they're also concerned of the repercussions that could amount here in the UK. Yesterday we heard that the government has given £3 million additional funding to the security organisation CST. They provide security for Jewish schools and synagogues and other Jewish buildings. They've said in the last week there's been a 324% rise in the number of anti-Semitism reports that they've received. We've also heard reports that today at least 3 schools in North London have closed today, and that's because of increased security concerns after a former leader of Hamas has called for global protests today around the world. Now, I think we can hear from a few people that I've been speaking to in Golders Green today on their feelings of how they feel at the moment in the UK.
Well, I suppose like most other people, very concerned, and obviously we have to be wary of where we go, where we are, and be vigilant, and obviously much more than usual.
Very threatened, very worried. I've just taken my son to school. He's in Hasmonean, and he asked me to pick him up because he's worried, he's scared, and he's a 15-year-old. You know, this should not be happening here in England.
So obviously it's a concerning time. We're trying to live lives as normal as possible. I want to start off. I think everyone's got a legitimate right to protest and to campaign for what they feel is right.
Well, thank you to Lisa for bringing us those voices from Golders Green in North London.
Well, still to come, we're crossing over to Tel Aviv next to get the latest on the ground there. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News, the People's Channel.
Hello, very good morning to you. I'm Alex Burkill, and here's your latest GB News weather update on this wet and windy Friday. We do have some colder weather to come this weekend, but for the time being, it's a wet and windy picture across the bulk of the UK. Heavy rain across many parts of England and Wales. The highest rainfall totals likely to be building up over the Welsh mountains, but for many, it's a wet picture. And in the south, we could see some heavy, thundery downpours developing as we go through the afternoon. Brighter further north, but blustery showers across Scotland and Northern Ireland. A chilly feel here, milder towards the south with highs of around 21 or 22 Celsius. Some further heavy rain as we go through the end of the day across the south-southeast, but that rain does clear away as we go through the night. And then we have quite a few places seeing clear skies overnight. Some showers, though, piling down on a cold northerly wind, so particularly around Irish Sea coastal areas and towards the north of Scotland. But with clear skies, many places are going to wake up on Saturday morning to a chilly start, a touch of frost, especially in the north, but then it should be a mostly bright morning. We are going to see showers continuing to pile down on that northerly wind, and they are going to become more widespread as we go into the afternoon. Across Scotland, some of those showers could be wintry over the higher ground, so some sleet or snow possible here. And it's going to be a cold day. Temperatures markedly down compared to where they were last weekend, getting to highs of just 14 or 15 Celsius.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
This time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you. My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning. It is 10 a.m. on Friday, the 13th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with Ellie Costello and me, Tom Harwood. Coming up today.
24 hours to evacuate. Israel is telling everyone in North Gaza to relocate to the south of the Strip. That means 1.1 million people have to flee their homes. But where do they go? We'll have the latest.
Sunak's military support. The UK will send 2 Royal Naval vessels and surveillance aircraft to the Middle East in order to bolster security. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps spoke to GB News this morning about why the UK is taking this action.
By surveillance, provide the potential for humanitarian aid, but also to act as a deterrent in the wider region.
Get a grip. That's what the Prime Minister told police chiefs to do when it comes to tackling anti-Israel hate. This comes as 2 Jewish schools in London said they were closing to protect their pupils.
And of course, this show is nothing without your views and your comments on all of the stories we're discussing and all of the perspectives. Email in gbviews@gbnews.com. But before all of that, let's get the latest news update with Tamsin.
Tom, thanks very much. Good morning from the GB Newsroom. It's 10 o'clock. Israel has told the 1.1 million residents of Gaza City to move south within the next 24 hours. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. It says Israel should rescind the order to avoid turning tragedy into calamity. But the Foreign Office here in the UK is advising people to follow the advice. The siege of Gaza continues, with Palestinian authorities saying more than 1,500 people have now been killed. Israel is retaliating against the Hamas terror group after an unprecedented wave of attacks at the weekend. The group killed 1,300 people and took over 100 hostages, including British nationals. Meanwhile, the Israeli Defence Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely. Tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, with IDF troops bracing for the militant group Hezbollah to open up a second front in the war. The US Secretary of State met the Palestinian president a short time ago after touching down in Jordan. Antony Blinken is touring Middle Eastern countries, trying to stop the Israel-Hamas war spilling over into neighbouring countries. The meeting comes after Mahmoud Abbas condemned violence against civilians last night after having previously failed to do so in the wake of Saturday's deadly terror attacks. Here, the UK is sending spy planes and 2 Royal Navy ships to the Eastern Mediterranean to support Israel's fight against Hamas. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak spoke to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reiterate the UK's support for the war against the terrorist group. The aircraft are beginning patrols today to track threats such as the transfer of weaponry. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says the deployment will reinforce regional stability.
We're sending not just ships, but also aircraft to really monitor the situation, provide surveillance, provide the potential for humanitarian aid, but also to act as a deterrent in the wider region that others who might want to get involved in, at the moment, what is essentially a terrorist organisation having attacked Israel and Israel's response. And we don't want to see other organisations thinking, oh, this is an opportunity to exploit that situation.
Some North London Jewish schools are closing today over concerns for the children's safety amid the Israel-Hamas war. It's reported that 4 Jewish schools in North London told parents they would not reopen until Monday. Meanwhile, Number 10 has announced an additional £3 million of funding to go towards providing extra security for the UK's Jewish population. It comes as the Jewish security charity CST recorded a 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents after the outbreak of conflict in Israel. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Despite various media reports of questionable content, Mr Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. The Prime Minister is also in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering has been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. The Prime Minister reminded the summit that they are the first line of defence in the high north, in the North Atlantic and the Baltics. And in other news, the founding member of the influential band the Isley Brothers has died. Rudolph Isley formed the group with his brothers in Ohio in 1954. They stopped recording for a time in the mid-50s after their brother Vernon was tragically killed in a bicycle accident. After reforming, they recorded a string of classic hits, including Shout, which was later covered by Lulu. He left the group in 1989 to become a Christian minister, though he occasionally joined his former bandmates for special performances. Rudolph Isley was 84. This is GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. Now it's back over to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks so much, Tamsin. It's 5 minutes past 10 and you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello.
Now, over 1 million Gazan residents are ordered to flee south in just 24 hours by Israel.
Charities on the ground say that the request is impossible, while the UN says it can't be done without devastating consequences.
Well, people in Gaza are now caught between Israel telling them to move and Hamas saying don't respond as Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip continues.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister warns of difficult days ahead as he swears in his new war cabinet, while the country's top general admits that the military has failed to protect its citizens. Well, the former chair of the Defence Select Committee, Tobias Ellwood, is back with us on the programme. Very good to see you again, Mr. Ellwood. I'm very sorry for the technical issues earlier where we lost you. We're very pleased to have you back. So let's touch upon what we were just discussing here in the studio about that warning from Israel to everybody in North Gaza. That's about 1.1 million people to move south in the next 24 hours. That is about 40,000 people per hour. Meanwhile, Hamas is telling them to stay put. The UN saying that there are going to be devastating consequences in that. What's your reaction?
Yeah, I do fear, I was stressing this before we got cut off, that we are falling into Hamas's trap. They have no interest in looking after the people of Palestine, and this demand now to move 1 million people in the hope that somehow the hostages can be liberated, control can be restored to Gaza, I think will be very, very difficult indeed. You know, fighting in built-up areas is the most demanding, most dangerous form of warfare you can have, and it favors the insurgent, in this case Hamas. And as I say, they will be preparing for it. The Israeli Defense Forces are one of the most formidable in the world, but this sort of street fighting will be hugely costly. There's tunnel systems, there's weapon systems that Hamas have, and unless you're going to aerial bomb, you know, from height, that means you're going to destroy much of Gaza City as well. That means that Israel will own the problem. I'm going to stress the concern of this spiraling out of control, of miscalculation, of escalation. Your newsreader just ran through a whole load of issues well beyond the Middle East, including here in the UK, as to how this conflict is spreading, how extremism, how impressionable young Muslims are being perhaps encouraged to support Hamas's cause. It's unbelievable, some of those scenes that we've seen, given the atrocities Hamas have been doing. I'm just concerned about, you know, after 9/11, when, you know, mistakes, strategic mistakes were made. We now know that. And from my own personal perspective, I lost my brother in the Bali bombing, which was a year after 9/11, in miles away from Afghanistan, miles away from the Middle East, miles away from the United States, because indoctrinated people believed the messaging and the hate that had been spiraled and built up. And my concern is, however well-intentioned, that we could see major strategic errors repeated in absolutely that right cause to surgically remove Hamas. They have removed any right to be able to lead the people of Palestine. How we go about it, that's the big question now.
The risk of escalation is clear, and we're already seeing not just activity, of course, from Hamas in Gaza, but also activity from Hezbollah in the north, in Lebanon. And, of course, all of these reports of just how much Iran may have been behind this. What is the risk now that this is not a localised conflict in Gaza, that this spreads into something much larger, engulfing many more countries in the Middle East?
Well, I'm pleased you mentioned that, because we don't introduce the connectivity between Hamas, Hezbollah and Iran enough. There is simply no way Hamas could have conducted the scale of this atrocity without outside support, and that comes to Iran. But where is the collective international strategy to stand up to Iran? For too long, Iran has been able to use its proxy influence right across the Middle East, and nobody has done enough to challenge that. And until that happens, this cycle of violence, whether it's in Israel or elsewhere, will continue indeed. That's the focus that I think we need. That's the international leadership that we need to see from Antony Blinken, from Britain as well. Because otherwise, as I say, this will repeat itself. It will spread into Lebanon. It will spread into other parts of the Middle East itself, with knock-on consequences across the world in every diaspora that there are, as we're seeing already. Big questions for the West. But allowing this invasion to take place, understandable though it actually is because of what's been happened, I think is a strategic error.
Well, Tobias Ellwood, we're seeing live pictures now of Gaza. It looks peaceful as things stand, but we know, of course, the build-up that is occurring around this strip and what might happen at any point in the next 24 hours. Of course, you mentioned Antony Blinken, the US Secretary of State. He was in Israel yesterday. We understand he is now in Jordan, and we're expecting a statement from him in the next few hours. What would you, as the former chair of the United Kingdom Defence Committee, like to hear from Antony Blinken today?
Well, I was actually Middle East minister, so I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. I visited Gaza many times, visited Jordan as well. And the one big change, perhaps, since the last cycle of violence that you were touching on earlier is actually the Abraham Accords, is Muslim countries in the Middle East choosing to remove their hostility towards Israel, to accept Israel's right to exist. And if there's any future to be had in a peaceful Gaza, it will have to include the support and cooperation of the Abraham Accords signing countries. So, Bahrain, Jordan, the Emirates and so forth. These are the countries, Egypt particularly, these are the countries that need to lean into this and say, yes, we're going to help develop governance in Palestine, in the Palestinian territories and in Gaza as well, which precludes Hamas having any involvement whatsoever. Until you reach those, starting asking those questions, you're not going to have a political solution that will allow any form of peace to last. We'll continue in the cycle of violence. That's where Antony Blinken and indeed Britain, I believe, should be focusing on.
What do you make of Egypt's role in all of this? Because the geography here is significant. Gaza has two borders, as you know, one with Egypt, one with Israel. So for Gazans who wish to flee, the only option would be Egypt. And so far, Egypt has rejected any move for safe corridors for civilians. And we do know that, of course, there's no food, no fuel, no water going into Gaza. What is your response to that? Should Egypt be doing more? Should they be giving aid? And should they be opening corridors for civilians?
Yes, not just alone, but collectively, as I say, with those other countries that have decided to take a different approach to working with Israel. But Egypt is a complicated case. Don't forget that President Sisi came into power removing the Muslim Brotherhood because of what happened there. So they've deliberately closed that border or control it vehemently because they don't want the extremism that you see developed and incubated in Gaza to spill into Egypt itself. The whole Muslim Brotherhood was able to develop and eventually take control of Egypt. So that's what President Sisi is concerned about, is that what is happening in Gaza, that extremism could easily spill into Egypt itself. But you can't be in denial. We need to recognize that there are 2 million Palestinians that we want to then place a dividing gap between their support or with Hamas and indeed the rest of the Muslim community. So there are other governance forms, Fatah, the Palestinian Authority, as I say, the Abraham Accords coalition too. They need to be looking into this to say, we're going to step forward and we're going to help manage the Gaza Strip in a way that we've not done before. Invading alone is a military solution with no strategic end. And as I say, that could be very, very dangerous indeed.
Now, we're just seeing pictures of tanks in Israel. These are live pictures in Israel right now. The tanks are in the distance, but of course we are expecting activity in the next 48 hours in this part of the world. Israel will be moving in to Gaza. So there are some live pictures of those tanks. But just finally, Tobias Ellwood, you mentioned the Abraham Accords, the normalisation of relations between Israel and so many of those countries in the Middle East. Of course, one of the countries that wasn't part of the Abraham Accords was Saudi Arabia. And there was much speculation that Saudi Arabia was moving to more normal relations with Israel, that could have happened by the end of this year, and that to some extent that might have been the instigator for all of this terrorism and this escalation, that Iran did not want Israel and Saudi to have normal relations, and Iran instigated these attacks in order to prevent that from happening. Do you think that's a credible theory?
I do, 100%. And it goes back to the fact that we're not spending enough time understanding Iran's proxy influence in the region, because this is all about Iran's hostility to Saudi Arabia and Iran allowing its proxy influence to then encourage conflict and to try and pull down the whole Abraham Accords coalition. The fact that Saudi Arabia might be intended to sign absolutely is much behind this too. So until we recognize that the battle is with Hamas, but the actual wider conflict, the war, the political war is with Iran. That's what needs to be solved. That's where our energy needs to go. That's where the West needs to invest far heavily. There was an opportunity when Soleimani was killed, General Soleimani, the commander of the Quds Force, you might recall, the IRGC, the Iranian Revolutionary Guards. Donald Trump took him out, I think, in the early 2020. That was an opportunity to then push back on Iran's influence across the Middle East. We missed that, and we're now paying the price for that.
Well, Tobias Elwood, thank you so much for your analysis and your thoughts and your expertise in this area. We really appreciate it here on GB News. And personally, I'm very glad we could get that connection back up and running. Really valuable stuff there.
Yeah. Well, let's go to the ground in Israel, shall we, where our reporter Charlie Peters is live in Tel Aviv. Good morning to you, Charlie. Very good to see you this morning. So what is the situation on the ground in Tel Aviv? Israel telling everyone in North Gaza that they must relocate south in the next 24 hours. We predict that's about 1.1 million people.
That's right. It's a significant indicator that Israel is now preparing to conduct a more significant bombardment of the north of Gaza as it shapes the ground for that likely invasion in the next 48 hours of the Gaza Strip, their first in the territory since 2014. But as it moves to that attack and as it prepares for that assault, there are serious questions about whether the country can secure its borders to the north, attacks coming in from southern Lebanon and shelling from Syria. And there are also concerns about security in southern Israel. Are they managing that situation there as well? More terrorists were still killed yesterday while they were amassing those troops on the south. Here I am in central Tel Aviv, where organisers are coming together at this restaurant to dish out 30,000 meals a day to civilian volunteers, but also to soldiers across the country. The army isn't quite ready to send in its troops. It has to kit out and mobilise up to 500,000 troops across the country. And those logistical supplies are a strain. Local volunteers here tell me that the army can't do it all. They need civilians to step up. Yesterday, we were in a convention centre that was sending out supplies, kit, equipment, batteries, torches, all the stuff an army needs to keep itself fighting. Well, here, they're sending them food. Like I said, 30,000 meals a day coming out here, going in all directions across the country to keep the front lines fed. What's going to happen next in the next 48 hours? Well, it's likely that the bombardment of Gaza will be severe. Once those 1.1 million civilians head south, there are only two main supply routes that they can take, one near the coast, one more inland, and it will create an even more devastating humanitarian situation that we're seeing in Gaza at the moment. They will have to leave shelters, they will have to find new ones, and Israel will almost certainly, with its air forces, hit targets in northern Gaza with bunker buster and more severe munitions.
Well, Charlie, stay with us because we're just showing pictures now to those watching on television of supporters of the influential Iraqi Shiite cleric who is named Muqtada al-Sadr. Now, they're gathering in Baghdad in an enormous protest to show solidarity with Gaza, to show solidarity with Palestinians. The question, I suppose, here is what is the wider feeling in the region? Where does support lie? And could this spill into a much larger war?
Well, we have seen yesterday the Israeli Air Force conducting its first strikes away from the country, hitting the runways at both Aleppo and Damascus international airports. Now, we understand that those strikes were conducted by fighter jets coming out of north of the country in order to reduce the effects of Iranian proxies in the region. Of course, Iran's IRGC, its Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, operates very widely in Syria, and it's known to supply through that Shia crescent from Iran all the way to Lebanon is known to supply Iranian proxies in the region, and these forces, like Lebanese Hezbollah, are engaging Israeli defences. We have seen anti-tank guided missiles, shelling, mortaring and rockets being fired over from southern Lebanon in the last 72 hours, and again also shelling from Syria. And so there are fears that this situation could spill over into a wider regional conflict. The US Secretary of State Antony Blinken said yesterday, he reaffirmed the President of the United States' warning that anyone thinking of joining in this conflict, he offered one word: don't. And America has been providing munitions and diplomatic support to shore up Israel's defense and to limit the cause that anyone might have to join in this conflict. But on the ground, Israelis are very concerned about that. In Tel Aviv, there is an atmosphere of mild terror, I would say, as people from southern Israel come up here for shelter, but also as soldiers prepare to be deployed and mobilized to the front lines across their country.
Well, Charlie, as we're speaking to you, we're seeing live pictures of the skyline in Gaza right now, and it looks as though leaflets are being dropped. We know that the Israeli army have been dropping leaflets into the Gaza Strip, telling Palestinians to leave their homes or risk being killed in airstrikes. As we know, Israel is continuing to rain down missiles on the Hamas-controlled territory. But we've also been hearing, Charlie, that Hamas is telling those in Gaza, many who do not have internet connection because there is no power, they have been telling them to stay put.
That's right. This morning, about an hour after reports of IDF liaison officers telling the UN that Gazans needed to leave the territory in the north, Hamas said it was propaganda. It urged civilians to stay. Why would they do that amid the bombing campaign? Well, as we know, Hamas terrorists in the north and across the Gaza Strip do rely on civilians as human shields. They protect the point of origin of their rocket attacks so that after they make impact, the Israeli Defense Forces and their anti-missile attacks cannot be launched back onto Hamas militants. Israel does not want to cause that horrible phrase in war, collateral damage. And so they do things like a knock and drop. So they hit a multi-story building, for example, with a non-charged munition to warn civilians to leave, and then they come again with the active munitions to destroy it. These are buildings that they, through intelligence, believe that Hamas terrorists are gathering in. But last night, they hit over 750 targets in the Gaza Strip, targeting what they said were Hamas military capabilities, radar systems, air defense systems, bunkers, shelters, ammunition supplies, all the things that Hamas are requiring and using to sustain their military effort in the region. Now, but of course, hundreds have died in that bombing campaign from the Israelis. But as 1.1 million are forced to flee south, we expect that bombing campaign will become even more severe.
Well, Charlie, as you've been speaking, we've just been seeing more of those leaflet drops, what must be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of leaflets raining down like confetti on the city of Gaza. These are written in Arabic, telling citizens in Gaza City to leave their homes. The words in English read, "For your safety, you must leave your homes immediately and go to shelters," of course, written in Arabic there on leaflets with the colour green and white. The pictures of these leaflets raining down, it could be mistaken for snowfall. There were so many leaflets coming down from such a height. Really stunning scenes there in Gaza, and I suppose it really does emphasise just how serious this is all getting, just how imminent this invasion might be. Charlie, we will be back to you throughout the programme. Thank you very much for your updates for now. And, of course, stay safe there in Israel.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Now, we have had some emails from you on this war, Israel-Hamas war. Annette says, "I think the British government should keep supporting the Israeli government and keeping people safe." And Martin says, "If Israel move into Gaza, I'm concerned about the loss of life on both sides. It's a difficult urban environment. It's difficult, but Israel should find another, more selective way to deal with Hamas." And that's exactly what we were discussing earlier on in the programme, could there be a successful or a good military option here?
Well, we'll have answers and more of your views after this.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is 2 new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
It's 10:29 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
Now we can take you now to some live pictures. This is supporters of the influential Iraqi Shiite cleric Muqtada al-Sadr. They're gathering at a protest in Baghdad to show solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. And here we can see live pictures in Israel of tanks in the distance there in this live shot on the border with Gaza. We know that a ground offensive could be expected in the next 24 to 48 hours. Israel telling everyone in North Gaza, it's around 1.1 million people, to relocate to the south of the Gaza Strip in the next 24 hours.
Indeed, in the last few minutes, we've been seeing leaflet drops, tens, if not hundreds of thousands of leaflets raining down on the city of Gaza, telling the citizens in Arabic to, for your own safety, leave their homes immediately and go to shelters. We are expecting imminent action in this part of the world. Imminent bloodshed, no doubt.
Yes, there is confusion in northern Gaza as well, as Hamas is telling civilians to stay put. And we just heard there from our reporter, Charlie Peters, who says this is proof that Hamas use their people as human shields. We'll have more analysis after the morning news with Tamsin.
Ellie, thank you. Here are the headlines at 10:31. Hamas has told residents in Gaza to stay at home as Israel's ground offensive looks imminent. It comes after Israel has told the 1.1 million residents of Gaza City to move to the south within the next 24 hours. Leaflets are being dropped on the area this morning, warning people to leave. The UN says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. It says Israel should rescind the order to avoid turning tragedy into calamity. Meanwhile, the Israel Defense Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border. With a ground invasion looking increasingly likely, tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, with IDF troops bracing for the militant group Hezbollah to open up a second front in the war. The UK is sending spy planes and 2 Royal Navy ships to the eastern Mediterranean to support Israel's fight against Hamas. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, spoke to Israel's Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, to reiterate the UK's support for the war against the terrorist group. The aircraft are beginning patrols today and will track threats such as the transfer of weaponry. Rishi Sunak is also in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders at the summit were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering's been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. The Prime Minister reminded the summit they are the first line of defence across much of the region. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks in Israel. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Mr. Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, even after various media reports of questionable content. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. Those are the headlines, and of course you can get more on all of those stories by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Well, here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.22 and €1.1567. The price of gold is £1,543 and 72 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,621 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News, investments that matter.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Put your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 10:38 and you're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
Now it's time for a bit of a gear change this morning because it is that day of the year that we might all have marked in our calendars, we certainly do. It's World Egg Day. It's upon us today. Tom, what's your favourite way to have eggs in the morning?
Do you know what? I've been thinking about this.
Oh, right.
I'm a big fan of Egg and Soldiers. I'm a big fan of fried eggs, sunny side up.
Very American.
And here's a curveball, Spanish omelette.
I like a Spanish
omelette. Far superior to any other nation's omelette.
Yeah, you're going to ask me what my favourite egg is?
What is your favourite egg, Ellie?
Glad you asked. It's a nice runny scrambled egg, actually, which is a little bit...
Runny scrambled egg?
Yeah.
It's what you need to eat with a spoon.
Almost, yeah. It's a Gordon Ramsay egg. So you just let the eggs speak for themselves. You take them off the heat, you stir, and it's a little salt and pepper.
Ellie, we
Lovely.
could not be more different. I went for the most solid egg imaginable, a Spanish omelette, and you went for the most runny.
I know, but then...
It's chalk and cheese.
Your weakness is my strength, my strength is your weakness. But yes, it is World Egg Day today, and for many, it's a day to celebrate a staple of the great British breakfast. But for those who embrace a vegan diet, they condemn the humble egg due to its animal origins.
Well, debating this now is the farmer Gareth Jones and animal rights activist Joey Carbstrong. Let's start with you, Joey. What's wrong with an egg?
Thank you very much. Well, eggs are an interesting one because a lot of the cruelty and suffering is actually hidden in the egg-laying barns or the parent breeder sheds or in the hatcheries where they start at the hatcheries. They come from a parent breeder shed. These are the egg layers. They get hatched and the males and the females hatch out of the eggs. The males are useless to the egg industry, so they'll be either gassed to death or put in industrial blenders on their first day of life, fully conscious. This happens for free range as well. The female chicks go off to egg-laying barns where they've been selectively bred to produce around 30 times more eggs than their ancestor, the red jungle fowl. This increased laying, this is one of the worst things about the egg industry. Free range, organic, all of this is the same. The increased laying output puts enormous strain on their bodies. They lose calcium, nutrients, lose their feathers, become egg-bound. suffer painful prolapses. I've seen these, investigated these myself, and many end up suffering on the floor where the other birds peck them to death. And these conditions are rampant in free-range RSPCA assured systems as well. Free-range eggs are a scam. They can house up to 16,000 birds in a barn. Some house 32,000, and they put a dividing wall down the middle to meet an RSPCA stocking density standard. These are factory mega farms, these free-range eggs in the UK. 55% of eggs in the UK come from free range, but what they're doing is they're displacing the caged hens to free range and creating another demand problem. And these birds, what happens at the end of their life, around 18 months, they're all in a horrible condition and they get grabbed by catchers. They throw them into crates, break their brittle bones, and send them to a gas chamber to be killed, or non-stun halal slaughter to have their throat slashed. And this is all for an egg on your toast. I think it's completely unjustifiable.
OK, Gareth Jones, I can see you're quite ticked off with that. But Joey's saying that it's not ethical. There's a strain on animals, no such thing as free range. What do you say to that?
Well, I've just been to let my free-range chickens out and they wouldn't come out of the shed. I wonder why. Because it's raining and chickens don't want to go out in the rain. They've just had a lovely feed. I've just collected the eggs. They're happy as Larry. They love it. You know, we have 20-odd birds here that produce enough eggs for us as a family. That's sustainable. That's what it's all about. You know what? Affordable food comes at a price. And Joey, you know what, little Joey, honestly, always makes me laugh because he comes out with these massive, massive stories. But the majority of the people in the UK will be eating eggs every morning, every evening, and every night. He's a small, small minority. And do you know what? He's not even growing any of his own food. He's eating processed rubbish, travelling around takeaways, trying to bring down the livestock industry. You know, he shouldn't even get the time.
Why don't you focus on the point?
No, it's not character attack.
That's complete character attack using anecdotes. I've got these egg layers in. Statistically, look at the statistics. I'm sure you haven't even stepped foot in a free-range egg barn. You've got your own few little hens out the back.
Mate,
and you go, oh, look, I've got
loads. I've got
anecdotes,
loads of
character attacks.
I've just done an S4C program, okay, where we went on to a fantastic, brilliant free-range egg farm where they were feeding. No, listen, there's hundreds of them. There's hundreds of them. You just want to portray farm, mate. You just want to look. You're not even letting me finish.
Farmer. How many have you been in?
Gareth, if you stop there and just let Joey come back to you there, Joey.
Okay. Well, look, Gareth is a sheep farmer. He's a mouthpiece for the industry. He has vested interest in this industry. He looks after the interests of all his farming friends. The egg industry does not value the interests of the animals. They are a product, and they use these free-range marketing to hoodwink good people like you two hosts who don't have any clue about what goes on. We're investigators. We see it on the ground. If Gareth knows what happens in the egg industry and he's still being a lying mouthpiece for the industry, then that's on his moral compass. That's on him. Now,
Oh, I'm very sorry that we're going to get Joey Carbstrong back, but we do still have Gareth Jones here. And Gareth, Joey says you're just a mouthpiece for the industry. What do you say to that?
Honestly, the guy does make me laugh. You know, he can't even keep a conversation going. He's put himself off. Look, let's be honest with it. The majority of the people in the UK want affordable food. Farmers are here to produce food for the vast majority of people. And that's what we do. Go and buy a free-range egg. They're fantastic. We sell our little eggs, what we've got left, as butt nuggets at the bottom of our road in an honesty box. People will come from all over the place to try them. Farmers are working hard to feed the nation affordably and sustainably. This guy is just out there to try and change an ethos because he's got his own problems and he just cannot understand that people have a right to eat what they want and he just can't live with it. And as a vegan, I bet he doesn't grow an iota of his own food. Let's not forget, he's not growing anything. I'm a farmer. I grow my own veg. And let me tell you something, there'll be more creatures dying for me to put my veg on my plate than any of my meat. This guy will never tell you that because he lives in cloud cuckoo land. He's never grown anything. He doesn't understand the farming industry. And the majority of the food that he'll be eating will be coming from a processed factory. And that's just fact.
Joey, back to you.
Yeah, I had a bit of technical issues there, but I'm sure Gareth just went, oh, my farm, my farm's my friend's farm. I've got 3 hens out the back. And Joey, what does he say? Joey eats processed food.
He says you don't. It looks as though just lost Gareth there. So I'll tell you, Joey, what Gareth was saying. He was saying that more animals die as a result of getting your vegetables on your plate, that it's processed food that you are eating, and you don't understand the farming industry. What do you say to that?
Well, I have a very deep understanding of the farming industry, which is why I'm so passionate and about it. And Gareth uses anecdotes and not statistics, and he doesn't go into these farms and investigate them himself. Now, the claim that more animals are dying because of crop production or crop protection is an abject lie, and he doesn't have any data to back it up. He's just making baseless claims. Now, it takes on average 10 times more crop calories to produce the same amount of calories from animal products, and 40% of the arable land in the UK is used to grow feed for livestock. They grow crops to feed to animals. They harvest crops to feed to dairy cows and to egg-laying hens. This is about the egg industry here. Now, a lot of these crop deaths are not deliberate. They're combine accidents, which is not a deliberate rights violation, or they're crop protection. Crop protection is required to prevent global starvation. Now, not everyone can have a house that was passed down to them to have their Welsh lamb on there and to have a little plot of land out the back, which Gareth sits there with a gun shooting rabbits because he eats the rabbits. Now, he claimed this is just an appeal to hypocrisy. Focus on the point of what I'm saying. Free-range eggs are a scam. And Gareth, if you want to stand by the free-range egg industry, do it and see what happens when all of the footage is released to show the abject suffering and cruelty that happens in this industry. And I don't know how you can defend it unless you're just a spokesperson for the industry, which we all know you are.
Gareth, are free-range eggs a scam?
No, they're very tasty, nutritious, and they're part of a balanced diet. Yeah, he's just alluded, and you're going to get good, bad and ugly in every industry, and there's going to be a few bad eggs like everything else. We've got one sitting next to me there, but let's be due diligence, and let's make sure that the British public are getting good food on their plates. And an egg is one of the most nutritious things you'll get. If you want to be big and strong and healthy, get your protein in, get proper food in you. Look for seasonal food, look for food that's produced on grass. My chickens are having our own grain. We've got our own grass out there. They're out there eating insects. They're having a lovely life. And, the eggs taste exactly how they should be. And this is how we should be going forward. Let's see Joey growing some of his own food. Let's see Joey out in the field. Let's see him getting an allotment. He's not going to do that. He's going to sit in his ivory tower, wherever he is, and he's going to go around trying to slate people. And some people can't afford,
Can I interject, please?
Some of the...
Well, gentlemen, we started with Joey. We're going to end with Gareth. I'm afraid we've run out of time, but I hope that you both feel you've got equal time here to put across your cases, as you have done in a spirited way. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Yeah, passionate debate on both sides there. What do you think at home? gbnews@gbnews.com. Well, I'm very pleased to say that we are joined now by Dawn Newsroom and Nigel Nelson, who are our panel this morning. And the two of you need to start with what is just such a powerful front page on the front of the Telegraph this morning. I'll read it to you if you are listening on the radio, which says, "This is the most difficult image we've ever posted. As we are writing this, we are shaking. We went back and forth about posting this, but we need each and every one of you to know this happened." Dawn, do you want to tell us a little bit more about this?
Yes, I think both Nigel and I felt this was probably the most important front page today. There has been much debate about propaganda and how much of what we are hearing from Israel is true about babies being murdered in their cot, people being murdered in the desert, a rave for peace, etc., etc. So the Daily Telegraph, yesterday Israel finally posted a picture of one of the babies that had been indeed murdered in their cot by Hamas terrorism to prove that this had actually happened. The fact they had to do it, Ellie, was frankly horrific, but it does silence the people saying this is all propaganda, it didn't happen.
Dawn, I just need to say we're seeing live shots now of a funeral in Israel for some of those who have been murdered in these terrorist attacks, as you were describing.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Telegraph have Israel put this image on social media yesterday, and with the statement saying it doesn't paint 1,000 words, it paints 1,000,000 words. It's a tiny baby in a baby grow, in a nappy, lying in a body bag covered in blood. The baby grow is covered in blood. I'm sorry if you're listening and you find this difficult. It is incredible. Difficult to describe, and I appreciate why the Telegraph didn't put it on page one. Part of me wishes they had, to be honest with you, because I think it really brings home the horrors of what is going on. I mean, it is out there, and, you know, you can see it, but the Telegraph have printed it on page 3, a big half page on page 3, and I think it's important, and I think I had this debate yesterday, Ellie, and I still can't believe I had this debate about the stories about babies being beheaded in their cots, and someone told me, you've got no proof they were beheaded, they were just killed, they were probably just shot. And it's like, hold on a minute. Does it matter how you kill a baby in its cot? Whether it is beheaded or shot or has its throat slit, you are still murdering a baby in a cot. And someone was actually going down that road debating, you have no proof that these babies have been killed and they weren't beheaded. And I was absolutely horrified. So that's why I think Nigel and I wanted to talk about this. We've both worked on newspapers for a very, very long time. I edited a national newspaper for 15 years. And we would get, especially during the terror attacks, 9/11 and the London attacks, we would get images in. You didn't get them unpixelated, you got them on the news wires. So they weren't pixelated. You saw the real horrors of what was going on. It was the editor's decision, obviously, whether you published those images or not, how much you published of them, etc. And obviously they were pixelated, but you saw them. You actually saw these images in real life. And the one, I don't know about you, Nigel, but the one I will never forget was seeing the images coming in of the Taliban burning the pilot in the cage. Now, that never went out. It was heavily pixelated if it did go out online. I watched that several times. And you can never, ever unsee it. But this is the reality of what we're talking about. You know, there are lots of people talking politics on every single side of this debate. There's lots of propaganda, as we all know. You know, the first victim of war is truth. But for people to debate whether babies were shot or beheaded in their cots, I find utterly appalling. Nigel, I mean, you...
I think that for any editor, it's a really difficult decision about how far you go, because inevitably a picture like this is going to upset some people. So it's a really big decision to go and do it. However, I think the Telegraph did exactly the right thing this morning. Pictures really do change things. I mean, we can all remember Alan Kurdi, the 2-year-old Syrian boy found drowned on the Turkish beach. It was a heart-rending image, but it changed the public's perspective of Syrian refugees. As a result, David Cameron launched the scheme where 20,000 came to Britain. They've integrated and assimilated really well with British society. It was a tremendous success, but it needed a picture like that to actually to nudge people to understand how serious the whole thing is. And that's what this picture does. It shows just how serious what happened over the weekend was.
Do you think, Nigel, that this picture and the fact that Israel have tweeted it, and it's a really graphic picture, do you think that will change the hearts and minds of some of the deeply callous people that we've seen on the streets of cities like London, ripping down posters of missing children and shouting in the face of Jews?
Yes, in a word, that absolutely. That's why the picture is so important. That it's perfect. People have every right to support Palestine, but certainly not Hamas. And those who are just have to look at that picture to see why.
And can we just make clear, this does not justify the murder of innocent children and babies in the Gaza Strip either. And it's like two wrongs never make a right. But by talking about this particular image and this poor baby, people go, oh, but what about the children being murdered in the Gaza Strip? And it's like, yes, you should care about them as well. We care about the slaughter of all the innocents who are losing their lives and are going to lose their lives and have lost their lives.
Is it not right to make a distinction, though, between a terrorist group that goes to a music festival, that goes to people's homes, that shoots innocent people deliberately, and an army trying to take out terrorists where people sometimes get caught in the crossfire or disastrously people are used as human shields. Is there not a moral distinction?
Yes, there is a huge difference between terrorism, which is what Hamas are, and as Nigel alluded to now, and sort of like an army going to war. The issue with the Israeli army going into the Gaza Strip is they are fighting a terrorist group. They're not fighting the Palestinian army, they are fighting a terrorist group who have been known in the past, and will do so again, use their own citizens as human shields.
They are embedded with those civilians as well, aren't they, Dawn? 2.2 million of them, and we are expecting that ground offensive to start in the next 24 to 48 hours. Thank you so much, Dawn and Nigel, and we'll be back on the ground with Charlie Peters in Tel Aviv after this.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 11 a.m. on Friday the 13th of October. This is Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Howard and me, Ellie Costello. Coming up for you today.
24 hours to evacuate. Israel is telling everyone in North Gaza to relocate to the south of the Strip. That could mean 1.1 million people have to flee their homes. But where precisely do they go? We'll have the latest.
Sunak's military support. The UK will send 2 Royal Navy vessels and surveillance aircraft to the Middle East to bolster security. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps spoke to GB News this morning about why the UK is taking this action.
Provide surveillance, provide the potential for humanitarian aid, but also to act as a deterrent in the wider region.
Get a grip. That's what the Prime Minister told police chiefs to do when it comes to tackling anti-Israel hate. This comes as 4 Jewish schools in London have now said they're closing to protect their own pupils.
Well, we love to hear from you. This programme is nothing without your views and opinions, so do keep them coming in for us this morning. gbviews@gbnews.com. But first, let's get a news bulletin with Tamsin.
Ellie, thank you, and good morning from the GB Newsroom at 11:01. Hamas has told residents in Gaza to stay at home, even as Israeli ground offensive looks imminent. Israel has been dropping leaflets on Gaza City telling its 1.1 million residents to move to the south within the next 24 hours for their own safety. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. The First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, has posted a video on social media from his mother-in-law, a retired nurse who's in Gaza.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are. 1 million people, no food, no water. And still they're bombing them as they leave. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world to let this happen in this day and age? And may God help us.
While the Israel Defence Forces continue to amass tanks and soldiers near the Gaza Strip border, with a ground invasion looking increasingly likely, tension is also building on Israel's northern border with Lebanon, with IDF troops bracing for the militant group Hezbollah to open up a second front in the war. The US Secretary of State met the Palestinian president a short time ago after touching down in Jordan. Antony Blinken is touring Middle Eastern countries, trying to stop the Israel-Hamas war spilling over into neighbouring countries. The meeting comes after Mahmoud Abbas condemned violence against civilians last night, after having previously failed to do so in the wake of Saturday's deadly terror attacks. The UK is sending spy planes and 2 Royal Navy ships to the Eastern Mediterranean to support Israel's fight against Hamas. Prime Minister Rishi Sunak spoke to Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to reiterate the UK's support for the war against the terror group. Aircraft are beginning patrols today to track threats such as the transfer of weaponry. Defence Secretary Grant Shapps says the deployment will reinforce regional stability.
We're sending not just ships but also aircraft to really monitor the situation, provide surveillance, provide the potential for humanitarian aid, but also to act as a deterrent in the wider region that others who might want to get involved in, at the moment, what is essentially a terrorist organisation having attacked Israel and Israel's response. And we don't want to see other organisations thinking, oh, this is an opportunity to exploit that situation.
Some North London Jewish schools are closing today over concerns for the children's safety amid the Israel-Hamas war. It's reported that 4 Jewish schools in North London told parents they would not reopen until Monday. Meanwhile, Number 10 has announced an additional £3 million of funding to go towards providing extra security for the UK's Jewish population. It comes as the Jewish security charity CST recorded a 400% increase in anti-Semitic incidents after the outbreak of conflict in Israel. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content despite being flagged by authorities. Mr. Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, even after various media reports of questionable content. The investigation is the first under the EU's new tech rules on harmful content. The Prime Minister is in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering has been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. Rishi Sunak reminded the summit they are the first line of defence in the High North, in the North Atlantic and the Baltics. And some breaking news we can give you now. There is a police operation underway at a high school in the French northern city of Arras. That's according to the French Interior Minister. French media are reporting that a teacher has died in a knife attack. That's all we have at the moment. A police operation underway at a high school in the French northern city of Arras. That's according to the French Interior Minister. Reports that a teacher has been killed in a knife attack there. Of course, we'll bring you more on this as we get it. This is GB News across the UK, on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker. All you've got to say is play GB News. Now, though, it's back to Ellie and Tom.
Thanks, Tamsin. It's 6 minutes past 11 and you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with Tom Harwood and me, Ellie Costello. Right, let's have a little delve into the inbox and see what you have been emailing us in from home. Of course, we've been talking about the Israel-Gaza war throughout the programme, the developments there on the ground. James says, don't get me wrong, I sympathise with the people of Israel, but talking about football, Wembley Stadium shouldn't have to light up its arches in the colours of Israel. He says, why can't football just be football? Let me enjoy my match in peace. Well, we are going to be speaking to Aidan McGee, our sports correspondent. He's going to be telling us a bit more about that story a little bit later on, James.
Well, I'd gently say that if football is just football, then there should be sort of no political gestures at all. But, of course, there have been lots of political gestures in football, lots of solidarity gestures in football. I don't see why you should have some but not others. But Andy has written in to say, we shouldn't send aid to Israel. We have enough problems here, like the cost of living. It's not our fight. That's Andy's view. That's, of course, after the United Kingdom has sent two Royal Naval vessels and, indeed, some surveillance helicopters to the region.
And Susan has emailed in, thank you so much, Susan, saying the war in Israel is very important, but so too is the war in Ukraine. I hope we don't all forget about the suffering of Ukrainians during this tragedy. And that is a really, really important point. Actually, I was thinking that yesterday, you know, what the people of Ukraine must be feeling at this time, and actually what the potential impact will be on donations and also military support.
It is so interesting to see what Volodymyr Zelensky has been tweeting about this, what the Ukrainian Defence Forces have been tweeting about this as well. They are very involved, I suppose, in this fight. They've been tweeting their solidarity with Israel, and I suppose this is all looking to the United States, which may well be thinking of a joint package of support for both Israel and Ukraine at their times of need.
Yes, well, let us know what you make of any of the stories that we are talking about this morning. But, of course, our top story is the ongoing Israel-Hamas war. GB Views at gbnews.com.
Now, over 1 million Gazan residents may be ordered to flee southwards in just 24 hours by Israel.
Yes, charities on the ground say that the request is impossible, while the UN says it can't be done without devastating consequences.
People in Gaza are now caught between Israel telling them to move and Hamas saying don't respond. This as Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip continues.
Well, Israel's Prime Minister warns of difficult days ahead as he swears in his new war cabinet, while the country's top general admits that the military has failed to protect its citizens.
Yes, the Israeli government has brought in opposition, centrist and moderate politicians into a government that had previously been described as one of the radical right. Well, let's cross now to our reporter Charlie Peters, who is live in Tel Aviv for us now. And Charlie, the mood on the ground must be febrile.
It is, absolutely. There is a state of terror here, but there's also a sense of the need to be active, to do something, to support Israel while it is bruised but not broken. The country is creaking and it needs all the support it can in all of the various fronts that it is fighting on. People here in this last week, this was a restaurant serving 400 covers a night. Now, suddenly, it's become a kitchen for soldiers. 30,000 meals are coming out of this restaurant every day and being sent to all corners of the country as they try to feed that army. Over 300,000 reservists activated since Saturday, when Hamas terrorists crossed over from the Gaza Strip and committed some heinous atrocities in southern Israel. And in order to supply those soldiers and keep the fight going on for the IDF, they are relying on support from civilians. Kitchens like these, but also volunteers in convention centres in Tel Aviv, also gathering basic supplies. There have also been appeals for people to donate body armour and boots and clothing that soldiers need on the front lines, because they're trying to kit out 500,000 soldiers in rapid time. At the same time, this is occurring, of course. 1.1 million Gazans expected to attempt to flee from the north of the Gaza Strip as the IDF, through its liaisons with the UN, put out that call. Leaflets flying in and messages going out on social media, of course, into the Gaza Strip to let people there know that problems are going to come, that more bombardment is going to come, and that likely ground invasion that people have been discussing since troops started to gather in southern Israel on Monday morning looks more and more likely. But before they can do that, before they can push their troops into one of the most densely populated parts of the world, with a myriad of tunnels and shelters where Hamas terrorists can gather, the Israeli Air Force needs to do more preparatory work on the ground. And that means more bombing. And so the Israelis need civilians to get out of there urgently.
And that's exactly the messaging from the IDF, isn't it, Charlie? They've been saying they're not interested in killing civilians. They're not interested in killing families. They are simply there to get rid of terrorists. And those leaflets that you just spoke about there, they've chosen to leaflet, haven't they, of course, because there's been a lack of food, fuel and water. Many have lost power as a result of that. So that's why they have gone to leaflets. And they've been in Arabic, haven't they, telling them to leave their homes immediately. But then you've also got messaging from Hamas to the people in Gaza, telling them to stay put.
Yes, and it's quite clear why Hamas needs civilians to stay put. They rely on them as human shields. It's a tactic, it's a procedure they've been conducting for many decades. It allows them to fire off rockets and not expect immediate artillery or airstrike fire from the Israeli Defense Force, because they don't want to hit civilian targets. In that horrible phrase of war, collateral damage. Now, the Israeli Defense Force does conduct targeted strikes in the Gaza Strip when they do see rockets being fired, but the removal of civilians from this location will allow for broader and more severe munitions to be launched into the Strip. We do know that, quote, advanced munitions were supplied by the US on Monday night. We don't know what that involves, but it's likely not just a resupply of the Iron Dome air defense system, but also offensive munitions that the IDF can use in any shaping aerial bombardment for a likely ground invasion. They need to soften the targets. They need to remove Hamas from those bunkers and those shelters, and they need to destroy Hamas military capabilities. Yesterday, Lieutenant General Herzi Halevi, the IDF Chief of Staff, said that it was their intention to destroy Hamas wherever they are. And that destruction will require weapons like bunker busters, ammunition that will create a hole in the ground and then send a second charge underground to explode into those shelters and remove Hamas terrorists. But as that offensive operation kicks up, of course, they do have to be conscious of the fact that there are well over 100 hostages being held within the Gaza Strip from several different nationalities. What will happen to those hostages as people flee from North Gaza? Will they stay with terrorists in their locations? Will they be forced to flee with civilians? We don't know. And I think that's a very important question for the IDF to really anticipate and prepare as they move into that likely invasion and aerial bombardment.
Now, of course, the eyes of the world are on Gaza. We know that imminent action will take place in that strip. However, of course, that's not the only threat that Israel faces. It's not just Hamas in the south. In the north, there's Hezbollah, and there's been significant activity among Hezbollah. Might Israel be facing a two-pronged attack from these twin terrorist groups?
That's right, Tom, and this is an extremely complex battle space with several participants and fighters on various sides. We know that Lebanese Hezbollah have been firing munitions from southern Lebanon into northern Israel. The Lebanese Hezbollah is actually a greater fighting force than Hamas in Gaza. They have more munitions, more men, more capabilities, and more freedom to operate around Lebanon, which is a country under the grip of grave political circumstances and considered by many to be influenced very strongly by Iran. Israel is also contending with dynamic threats coming in from Syria, where there has been shelling and mortaring for the last 72 hours. The shelling there was so severe, in fact, that the Israeli armed forces took the decision to attack Aleppo and Damascus's international airports. This was likely a warning to Iran to say, do not send your proxies here, do not send munitions and resupply these forces in the north, we will strike back. So yes, this axis of resistance, as the Houthis in Yemen describe it, being urged to rise up and attack Israel from the north at the same time. In order to resist those attacks, they are sending hundreds of thousands of reservists to the north to resustain those regions and to secure those borders. We've spoken in the last day with a British Israeli who expects to be mobilized and sent up there. People are waiting to be deployed. People are expecting lots of fighting on several fronts.
Well, Charlie, live from Tel Aviv, stay safe, and thank you very much for that latest update there. Now, as we were talking to Charlie, of course, we were seeing live pictures of a funeral in Israel for just some of those killed in the mass terrorist attacks this week.
Well, joining us now is defence editor at the Evening Standard and friend of the programme, may I add, Robert Fox. Very good to see you this morning, Robert. So, Israel telling everyone in North Gaza, around 1.1 million people, to relocate to the south of the Strip. We are expecting an aerial bombardment or a ground offensive to start very soon. What do you expect Israel's next move to be?
Well, whatever it is, it's going to be extremely difficult, because what they're about to undertake is, as you suggest, it seems a ground operation, and these are very, very difficult to do at the best of times. And you have to realize, with its reservists and its national service, that Israel is only a partly professional army. The IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, that it's largely a citizen army, and you need highly trained troops to do street fighting, particularly the street fighting for which the Hamas militias, the fighters, will be prepared. I think we're still quite a way off. By that, I don't think I would be very surprised if the ground operation itself begins tomorrow morning, it being the Sabbath, the Shabbat. I haven't seen, okay, it's very selective, my viewing, of professional formations being organized at the front, which is what you would do if you're going to make a ground incursion. They have to be armored, they have to be tooled up, and you would have your more professional troops in these forming up positions.
Robert, it is so fascinating thinking of this region as a whole. It's not just, of course, Gaza in the south where there have been rockets firing, but also in the north as well with Hezbollah. And the age-old adage is, in warfare, you never want a war on two fronts. Is this what Israel is now facing?
Well, I think Israel's known that it's had this really for quite some time, particularly when both Hezbollah, but particularly Hamas and Islamic Jihad, which can be even more crude and violent, although nothing can be as bad and as totally unexpected as the attacks on the settlements just east of Gaza a weekend ago. But Israel has always had this difficulty of how to live with the neighbors and how to live with the Arabs within its own community. The communities, by the way, are in parity now. If you take Greater Israel, including the occupied West Bank, which we've been talking about, plus Gaza, there are roughly 7 million Arabs, nearly 2 million of them actually have Israeli citizenship within Israel, 2 million in Gaza, 3 million on the West Bank, and 7 million Israeli Jews. It's a very, very delicate balance. And this, I think, is a crisis a lot of people have known is going to be coming for a very long time. And part of the thing that worries me about this very high-flown rhetoric, Chaps was indulging in it this morning, the broadcast that they will wipe out Hamas. Well, the guts and power and brains of Hamas is quite clearly, a lot of it is just not in Gaza. It's in the Gulf. This is where they get the money trees working. This is where they have access to fantastic advanced weapons, really quite surprisingly so. It's part of the huge black market that has been accelerated around the Ukrainian armament, by the way, and where they get support and advice, and of course, you know where from. Indirectly from Iran through Hezbollah in Lebanon, where it has participated in government as well, which makes it more complicated, and from Iran itself.
Robert, as we speak to you now, we can see live pictures in Haifa in Israel where a funeral is taking place for a person who was killed at the weekend with those attacks from Hamas. Tell us a little bit about what the Israelis are going to face now in their self-defense going into Gaza. They want to kill those terrorists. They want to take them out. But Hamas, they don't wear uniforms, do they? So how will the Israelis be able to distinguish between a member of Hamas and a civilian? And we've also got the issue of those 140 or so hostages. How will they be able to get to those hostages with those movements of civilians down south into Gaza?
I only have a 3-word answer for you, I'm afraid, Ellie. With great difficulty. Because Hamas knows how to conceal itself among the population, despite this very, very stark warning about getting out of the north of Gaza. As the UN has pointed out, and they're not totally party-free on this, on one side, it's going to be very difficult for these people to move out when there's such limited transportation. They're running out of fuel, they're running out of food. And it's going to be terribly difficult, this fight among the population. And I think if it gets really tough, I think it's going to be a terrible shock for Israel. I think that that's part of the consideration as to why Biden and Blinken are standing by. By the way, I wanted to ask your correspondent who said we shouldn't be sending aid to Israel and what's the Royal Navy doing there. I mean, we do have to make a very direct point there, as Britain has an interest because there are many Anglo-Israeli citizens that have dual citizenship. And I won't put it any finer than this because I think it could be dangerous. I think we have a very direct interest in some of the hostages.
Well, that's an answer to Andy, who wrote in to ask a question of the programme about sending aid to Israel. So I'm very glad that you've been able to answer that question from our viewer. Robert Fox, thank you so much for your expertise in this area. It's absolutely invaluable at a time like this, and we really appreciate your time.
Well, still to come, Robert Fox touched there on the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. Well, he met with the Palestinian Authority president today after promising unwavering support for Israel. So we'll bring you the latest on that after this short break.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
More energy this time!
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with these three.
Oh!
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sunday, the 29th of October at 9 on GB News.
What you get for breakfast is something that, if we do our jobs right, you will wake up to news that you didn't know the night before.
It's a conversation. It's not just me and Eamon.
We want to get to know you, and we want you to get to know us.
From 6, it's Breakfast with Eamon and Isabel.
Monday to Thursdays on GB News.
Britain's news channel.
People in Britain, they love free speech, but they also love fair play.
I don't care if I'm speaking somebody from a trade union, from the Labour Party, somebody from the SNP. And I think the viewers like to see that actually we can challenge one another, but in a positive way.
We think we ask the questions that people want to ask, and often we ask the questions that we wanted to ask in Parliament but never got the chance to ask.
So join us every Saturday, 10 a.m. till noon on GB News,
Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's at Drive Time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Join me, Andrew Pearce and Bev Turner, Monday to Thursday, 9:30 a.m.
Who benefits from that? Not the British public.
And on Fridays, join us, Tom Harwood
and Ellie Costello from Britain's Newsroom.
That's what you get with this show. That's fantastic.
If it's happening, we're talking about it on Britain's Newsroom.
GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Now then, Lee Anderson here. Join me on GB News on my show, The Real World, every Friday at 7 p.m.
I'm not eating bloody cat. Are you
Delicious.
mental?
Open your mouth. OK, here comes a train.
Reminds me of the scene in Singing in the Rain.
Adam, is that a good one?
Whoa! Join me at 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good morning, it's 11:27. You're with Britain's Newsroom here on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
Now, the US Secretary of State Antony Blinken met the Palestinian Authority president earlier today after promising unwavering support for Israel.
Yes, the Palestinian Authority partially governs the West Bank, but is a bitter political rival to the terrorist group Hamas, which controls Gaza. Well, joining us now is Greg Swenson, the chairman of Republicans Overseas UK. And Greg, Antony Blinken has got a job on his hands. He's doing a whistle-stop tour of many places in the Middle East. I understand today he's in Jordan. Where can the US act here when many countries in the Middle East will not see it as a neutral player in this scenario?
That's a great point, Tom. He's got a difficult challenge ahead of him. I'm glad to see that Secretary of State Blinken made the trip. I'm glad he's, saying all the right things, that he's standing with Israel. I think he's so far so good. It's more what he's not saying that I'm worried about. And you notice that in President Biden's speeches, both on Saturday and Tuesday, not once did he mention Iran. And I think that both Secretary of State Blinken and President Biden are probably embarrassed, but also don't want to really discuss the connection between Iran and Hamas, because the Biden administration has basically been funding Iran and therefore indirectly funding Hamas. And so, it's inconsistent, it's incoherent. I hope that Antony Blinken develops some consistency in his message and sticks with it. So far, so good on this trip. I hope he sticks with it.
Really interesting you mentioned that, Greg Swenson, because we were speaking earlier to Tobias Ellwood, who's a Conservative MP, and he told us that the battle is with Hamas, but the wider war is with Iran. Would you agree with him on that?
I agree. I think Tobias made a great point, and he, he's very well informed on this kind of stuff. So, look, I think to date, and this is why I was worried about Blinken. I think I mentioned he's said the right things on this trip, and so far so good. But the impulse on Saturday morning was appeasement. His first comment coming out of the gates on Saturday was to, keep some proportion and everybody, calm down. No, you need unconditional surrender or the destruction of Hamas. Friday night, Blinken released $75 million for the UN Palestinian Refugee Agency. That's going right to Hamas. That's going right funding violence. And the White House knew it. There are internal emails that discussed it, and yet he still released it. Then you have, of course, the energy policy, which has made, obviously created higher oil prices for the benefit of Putin, for the benefit of the mullahs, and then so destruction, or at least an aggressive stand toward U.S. energy policy, but at the same time relaxing the sanctions, essentially not enforcing the sanctions. That put another $50 billion. So it's not just the $6 billion that everybody talks about; it's the $50 billion from increased revenues and higher oil prices thanks to the energy policy. So this is a really inconsistent and incoherent policy. I hope they change it. What I'm afraid of is that he'll talk the talk for a few days while in the Middle East, and then in a few weeks they'll start talking about proportionality.
It's such a delicate situation, of course. Iran is a country that is speeding its way towards potentially a nuclear arsenal. And indeed, so many countries around Israel are ambiguous, I suppose, when it comes to the right of the state to even exist. Just finally, Greg Swenson, what can realistically be achieved in the short few pivotal days that we have ahead of us?
Yeah, hopefully the Secretary of State can bring some calm and have some concrete discussions with leaders in the region. Remember, we were very close to an agreement between the Saudis and Israel, another great step after the Abraham Accords, this very successful Abraham Accords. So I don't think there's this general hatred of Israel that in the greater Middle East. You have a lot of if you look at the UAE, they are doing a lot of business. There are many flights daily between Israel and the UAE. Bahrain, for example, there's a lot of progress being made. So I think this is a speed bump for sure. But I think hopefully Anthony Blinken will make the rounds and remain and try to maintain some unity in the cause for Israel and against Hamas.
Well, Greg Swenson, always very glad to hear your views. Thank you very much for talking to us here on
Thanks,
Britain's
Tom.
Newsroom.
Thanks, Ellie.
Greg Swenson, Chairman of Republicans Overseas. Now, much more to come, of course, on this and other breaking stories after your morning news headlines.
Tom, thank you. Here are the headlines at 11:33. Hamas has told residents in Gaza to stay at home, even as an Israeli ground offensive looks imminent. Israel has been dropping leaflets on Gaza City, telling its 1.1 million residents to move to the south within the next 24 hours for their own safety. The United Nations says such a move is impossible without devastating humanitarian consequences. Well, the First Minister of Scotland, Humza Yousaf, posted a video on social media this morning from his mother-in-law, a retired nurse who's in Gaza.
Everybody from Gaza is moving towards where we are. 1 million people, no food, no water. And still they're bombing them as they leave. Where are we going to put them? But my thought is, all these people in the hospital cannot be evacuated. Where's humanity? Where's people's hearts in the world to let this happen at this day and age? And may God help us.
Well, some news we've been hearing in the last half an hour. A police operation is underway at a high school in France, in the northern city of Arras. That's according to the French Interior Minister. Reports there that a teacher has been killed in a knife attack. More on that as we get it. Well, Prime Minister Rishi Sunak is in Sweden today, meeting with Northern European allies. Leaders at the summit were expected to focus on the threat from Russia, but the gathering's been overshadowed by the conflict in Israel and Gaza. The EU is investigating the social media platform X, formerly known as Twitter, after disinformation was spread in the wake of the Hamas terror attacks in Israel. In a letter sent to the platform's owner, Elon Musk, the European Commission said there were indications that X is being used to disseminate illegal content, despite being flagged by authorities. Mr. Musk says the Commission should list its examples publicly, even after various media reports of questionable content. Those are the headlines. You can, of course, get more on all of those stories. Just visit our website, gbnews.com.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick look at today's markets. The pound will buy you $1.219 and €1.1577. The price of gold is £1,549 and 63 pence per ounce. And the FTSE 100's at 7,598 points.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for physical investment.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to ordinary people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The Live Desk with me, Mark Longhurst.
And me, Pip Thompson. It's here Monday to Friday on GB News.
From midday, we'll bring you the news as it breaks, whenever it's happening and wherever it's happening, from across the UK and around the world.
Refreshing, feisty, but with a bit of fun too.
If it matters to you, we'll have it covered on TV, radio and online.
Join the Live Desk on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
So Jubes and Kerr, we tackle the issues of the day with real, robust debate, both sides of the fence, battling it out with me in the middle with my forthright opinions and views. And often really interesting things happen because you start with a position and then by the end of the debate you find actually, well, I might not have thought about that one.
What we need in this country is two new political parties.
You should maybe think about doing a 2024 calendar. I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm keeping you company right through until 7 o'clock this evening.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's watching.
Join us every night on GB News at 11 p.m. for Headliners, which is 3 top comedians going through the next day's news stories, which is exactly what you need, because when the establishment has gone crazy, you need some craziness to make sense of it.
Headliners. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper. We've got it covered for you. Every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there.
So join us 11 p.m. every night on GB News.
The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Every Sunday from 11, join Michael Portillo.
There will be topical discussion, looking at the week before and the week to come. So kick back and relax at 11 a.m. on Sundays on GB News with me, Michael Portillo. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute. Kick it up a gear with me, Patrick Christie's, at drive time, 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+, on the smart speaker app and on the GB News app. And if you've got an Alexa, all you have to say is, Alexa, play GB News. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with me, Patrick Christie's, on GB News and GB News Radio.
Good morning, it's 11:39 and you're with Britain's Newsroom on GB News with me, Tom Harwood, and Ellie Costello.
And we're joined again by Dawn Newsom and Nigel Nelson, who are on our panel for us this morning. Very good to see you both again. And I really want to start with the front page of The Sun this morning. I'll just hold it up so if you're watching on TV, you can see the beautiful image of Emily Hand, just 8 years old. She was snatched from a sleepover by Hamas on Saturday. She died, and her father, it must be said, one of the most emotional interviews I've seen in the past few days, saying it was a blessing that she died rather than be taken hostage by Hamas. Dawn, what did you make of that interview?
I listened to that, and it's impossible, even though as journalists you try not to get that emotionally involved with stories, but you're human. Of course you do, especially when it's children involved. And I listened to her dad, Thomas, his name is English, isn't he?
Yeah.
And
Irish.
Irish. And I listened to his interview, and the fact that when he was told, 'cause she was having a sleepover, as you just said earlier, a little friends at the kibbutz. And I listened to his interview when he found out that she'd been killed, they'd identified her body at the sleepover with her friends. And his reaction was to smile and go, yes. And I just think what horrors must you go through if you are being kidnapped. So he would rather his 8-year-old girl be killed, be murdered, than actually end up in the hands of Hamas hostage takers. And as we were discussing during the break, Ellie, and I'm not going to go into detail because it's just too horrific, women and girls during war, any terrorist situation, suffer the most horrendous things. They really do, and it is so you can completely. But the fact that he was so pleased his little girl was dead rather than a hostage.
For him, there was joy in her death because death was better than the suffering that she would be at the hands of.
That's the point. I think that living in this country, we don't actually appreciate what Israelis feel on a daily basis. That whenever you're there, you've got this kind of feeling all the time that there's an impending catastrophe around the corner, and that's the kind of feel of the country. And so when you have someone like Thomas Hand saying this about his daughter, he knows how horrific the alternative would have been, which then brings you to the next stage. What do you do about the 150 hostages who are being kept in Gaza? Now, if at the moment the Israelis have cut off food, water, electricity, and are saying that the hostages have to be released before that will be switched on again, that's a breach of international law. However, what are the Israelis to do? If you can't send in special forces to get the hostages out, and the danger of that, of course, is that many of them would die anyway, if there's a possibility of a deal by putting that kind of pressure onto Gaza, even though it's the civilian population who suffer, I can understand the Israelis doing what they're doing.
There are some suggestions that some of these hostages may have links to the United Kingdom. We know that some of these hostages are very old. Some of those who were captured were, in fact, Holocaust survivors themselves. Others, very young children. No doubt, little girls amongst them. One shudders to think what is going on in Gaza right now.
There was one, forgive me, I can't remember her name now, but she was a 78-year-old lady, a peace campaigner, had fought all her life for peace for the Palestinian people and the conflict, the hideous conflict that's been going for centuries in this area. This isn't just something that's happened, it's been going on. People have been dying for centuries over this area. But she was taken in a kidnap. But all her life, she has been working for peace. And she is now a hostage in Gaza, an area that she has literally fought for all her life. And you just can't comprehend what people are going through out there at the moment. It's just, but also, I mean, the fact that it is now spreading, and the fact that we have seen in London schools being closed down because Jewish people are too scared. Yeah, to go to school. I mean, the fact that an increase of 400% of anti-Semitic attacks in London. It's just...
It makes you question, Dawn. I don't know if we can show that video. We had it earlier on in the programme. You will have seen it, Dawn. It's 2 Muslim girls, it's gone viral on social media, pulling down posters of children, Israeli children, who are hostages. They're missing, they're in Gaza. And these 2 Muslim girls, I hope we can show you this video, pulled down those posters. And there's a bystander saying, these are innocent children, they're innocent children, they haven't done anything. It makes you question, where is our humanity in all this? People forget that there's human beings on both sides of this.
Yes, and I think what is happening and what has happened in the past, it dehumanises you. I mean, but the Israeli population and the population in Gaza are both very, very young populations. 70% of people in Gaza have never voted. The people in charge of those countries are older men, more interested in power than the people that they are supposedly protecting.
Well, Dawn, let's have a look at that video that we were describing right now.
Why don't you do something for Palestine? Why don't you...
This is for Palestine.
They're not mutually exclusive. It's children. It's children. It's innocent people.
Okay, what about the children in Palestine?
That's not. It doesn't make it.
Why?
Jesus.
You can hear there the words from the bystander saying this is innocent children, and one of the ladies pulling off the poster says, well, what about the children in Palestine? It does seem to be that you're one side or another.
And you shouldn't be. This is what I found so difficult about the whole thing. I've been very disappointed with many on the left who seem to be supporting, not supporting Hamas, but not condemning Hamas for what they did. And the whole point here is you can condemn Hamas and still believe in an independent Palestine. That's the position of the British government, it's the position of the Labour Party under Keir Starmer, it's the position of all world leaders when they put out a statement the other day saying that very thing, that the Hamas attack was absolutely grotesque. Doesn't mean that we should then give up on the idea of trying to get a proper Palestinian homeland. And the danger when you see videos like that, it shows how emotions run very deep. But more to the point, we're now seeing this uptick in anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, neither of which are justified by what is happening.
No. And I don't want to dwell on this or link it or cast any aspersions or speculate, but of course we have seen a knife attack in northern France today. In the last couple of hours, we know a teacher has been killed, we know others have been injured. We don't know the cause for this, but of course this is amongst an environment of heightened tensions across the world.
There is, and it's like even the car exploding in the Luton Airport car park. My first reaction to that was, is this terrorism? We're back to that stage again, almost like going back to the days of 9/11, where anything that happens you automatically think is linked to this horrific conflict. But it's important, so important to remember that not all Palestinians support our Hamas, and not all Jewish people support the current state of Israel and the way it's being run. And we need to make those divisions. I mean, Hamas are terrorists. Not all Palestinians are terrorists. We've got to stop thinking like that.
And Nigel, what do you make of what has happened in the last day or so in Israel, where Benjamin Netanyahu has brought in centrist politicians to his coalition, has made almost a new government, a war government? Of course, the previous iteration had been described by many people as radically right-wing, including what some would describe as more extremist politicians. This new iteration of Israel's government has brought in some of the more moderate voices from the Knesset, from the Israeli parliament. How important is that?
Well, I think that the idea that Israel is speaking with one voice is really important. I mean, the problem about Israeli politics is that they have probably the most pure PR system in the world.
Proportional representation.
Yes. So the result is that we always get coalition government. They have an awful lot of elections over there because of it, and trying to get all the various sides together is really difficult. When an event like this happens, it's really important to bring in the people you're talking about, the moderate voices.
Yeah. Nigel and Dawn, stay with us because we do want you to react to our next story that we're about to cover. Some breaking news. GB News presenter Nigel Farage, who was famously debanked by the NatWest Group, has been accepted now by Lloyds Banking Group for personal and business accounts after having been rejected by 10 banks.
Well, Nigel says he's pleased to see one high street lender isn't politically prejudiced. Well, we can go live now to Nigel Farage for his reaction. Nigel, thank you for joining us. This has been a saga and a half. How did we get to this point?
Well, I'm afraid that what's happened over the course of the last few years is that our corporate world has become increasingly politicised. The D&I agenda, the diversity and inclusion agenda, and banks and other organisations signing up to some organisation called B Corp. And unless you agree with their woke philosophy, you are very much in danger of being debanked. And that's exactly what happened to me. The shock, really, was that when I was told that my accounts were closing, the shock was to spend so many hours and face-to-face meetings talking to other high street banks, private banks in the country, and to be rejected by 10 of them. I mean, I'd virtually given up. I was at a sort of point of despair, thinking I'd been cancelled as a person. But I'm pleased to say that a friend of mine who runs a banking advisory service called J9, he got in touch with me and said, I think I can help. I said, well, you're probably wasting your time. But no, I went and met with Lloyds, and they were very clear that they do not judge people on their perfectly legally held political opinions. So I'm very pleased they've opened up bank accounts.
What's your message then to Lloyds Bank this morning, Nigel? As you say, a journey and a half, rejected by 10 banks here in the UK. You've finally been accepted by Lloyds.
Well, my message to Lloyds, of course, is thank you. But there is a bigger and far more important message that's got to go to all of our viewers, all of our listeners, and it's this. I know it's aggro, I know it's time, I know it's a terrible bore, but I would recommend every single person in this country to have more than one bank account, especially if you're a business, because I'm one of 1 million people who've had their bank accounts closed over the course of the last 4 years. You may be sitting at home thinking, this can't happen to you, but it can. So please get other bank accounts.
Now, Nigel, of course, you are an influential figure. You're a national voice. You brought this issue to the fore and even elicited responses from the government and the dethronement of the chair of the NatWest Group. But it is, of course, not so easy for some of those other million people to make a big splash, to make a big noise. Other than having multiple bank accounts, what should those million debanked people do? Is it your suggestion that there are some banks here that are better than others?
Yes, I mean, if you've been completely debanked, there are fintech solutions. There are online challenger banks out there where you can receive and pay money. The problem is you can't go and borrow any money off them. They can't give you mortgages, and they can't pay you interest on positive balances, which now with rates at 5%, is a real consideration. So there are fintech solutions out there, but it's not the same as having a bank account. You know, most people get debanked because the banks are so tied up with a ridiculous set of money laundering regulations that it makes it uneconomic to keep many accounts open. So there are several things I'm looking for here, and I'm delighted that Andrew Griffith, the City Minister, that Jeremy Hunt, even Rishi Sunak spoke up strongly in my defence. But this isn't just about me. This is about people all over the country. And I think, you know, number one, we absolutely have to have, in the 21st century, the right to a bank account. This isn't a normal private company you're dealing with. This is the same as getting water and electricity into your home. Without a bank account, living in the modern world is hard. And I would like to see some legislation passed to that effect. And the other thing, of course, is many people are being debanked, small businesses, because they take cash. You know, they're selling a tub of welts for £4 or whatever it is, and they take cash. And increasingly, the banks don't want cash. And that's where I think the GBNews campaign, the Don't Kill Cash campaign, which got 250,000 signatures very, very quickly, and which I was very honoured to present to number 11 Downing Street on behalf of our station and our viewers and listeners. You know, cash needs to be kept. And there are many other things in terms of looking at this money laundering regulation. Do you know, for every £1 that's been recovered of laundered money in the UK banking system, the compliance cost of the industry is £100. And as a result of that, many people are losing their accounts. I'm thrilled with what the government have said. They've got a year left in office. They now need to do something and kick the FCA, the regulator, very hard into action.
Nigel, looking back at this entire debanking row, where you have become a champion for the voiceless, many people weren't even aware that this could be the case, that someone could be debanked in a position such as yours. You have shone a light on something that many people weren't aware of. What have people been telling you in the streets about your fight, and where would you like to see it go next?
Well, the commonest response I've had from people, both through my website and on the street, is, I don't normally agree with you, Mr. Farage, but in this case, I do. I've had an awful lot of that over the course of the last few months. Look, I think it is really important. It's really important that we get changes to legislation in this country. And I would like to see this as an issue at the next election to challenge the Labour Party into also saying we need banking fairness for everybody. You know, politicians, leaders mouthing words is one thing, but we really do need some action. And actually, it was strange in a way, because when I sort of came out, as it were, as being debanked, it was amazing how many other high-profile people said the same. To admit to the country that you've been debanked is actually quite an embarrassing, humiliating thing to do. But now that I've done it, it's left other people free. So, you know, please, if you have been debanked, speak out. I can help you. I've got a non-profit website, accountclosed.org. If you've been debanked, come to me. And if we don't get the right action, we will consider a class legal action against the banking industry at some point in the not too distant future.
Well, Nigel, thank you so much for bringing us that breaking news right here on GB News. This, of course, is an issue that goes beyond party divides. We've heard everyone from Nigel Farage to Gina Miller be affected by this scandal. And Nigel, I suppose congratulations for your part, at least, in this horrendous situation being brought to a close today. Thank you for speaking with us.
Well, Dawn Newsom and Nigel Nelson are still with us here. What's your reaction to Nigel Farage being accepted by Lloyds Bank?
Well, initially, obviously good for Lloyds Bank, but I didn't, until Nigel started talking about this, I had no idea this was even a thing. But if you look at it, I mean, there was sort of like, you know, 343,000 people were debanked in 1 year alone, and that's 2021 to 2022. And as you've just said, even Gina Miller, the polar political opposite to Nigel. But you read some of the people that aren't political that have been debanked, like small charities have been debanked, people running small businesses have been debanked. It's actually much more common than we think. So fair play to Nigel for exposing it.
Yeah, he really has shone a light, hasn't he, on an issue that many didn't know existed.
No, I think that's absolutely right. That there's a lot I disagree with Nigel on, but when it comes to this, I think he's done a major public service. So I hope he gets his way, and everybody gets a right to a bank account.
Yes, because it is very, very difficult, isn't it, Dawn, just very briefly, to exist without a bank account in this modern society?
I might be wrong. I think there is a law in France that says you can't be debanked. So, I mean, and Jeremy Hunt has announced, thanks to Nigel's work, that they are looking into the legislation in this country now as well.
Yeah, and perhaps that's where this story goes next. But thank you so much, Nigel and Dawn, and thank you for you at home for watching us today. It's Mark and Pip up next with the Live Desk.
I'm Alex Deakin, and this is your latest weather update from the Met Office for GB News. Bit of a north-south split today. Some heavy bursts of rain over parts of England and Wales. Something a bit brighter, but colder for Scotland and Northern Ireland. Two areas of low pressure dominating. This one's been bringing some very heavy rain across parts of South Wales and will continue to do so, particularly on this weather front through the rest of today. We do have a Met Office yellow warning in place covering a large part of England and Wales. In the south and east, still pretty warm and still generally dry through much of the afternoon. Just a few showers here. Brighter skies further north, but with some blustery showers and a chilly feel. Temperatures struggling to get into the teens. One more day where we could see temperatures over 20 degrees across the southeast. But heavy rain continuing for South Wales, southwest England into the afternoon, then spreading into the Midlands, East Anglia and the southeast through the evening. So a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. Then it gets very windy across the Northern Isles during this evening and overnight. Very gusty conditions here. Elsewhere it turns clearer and a colder night, much colder than we've been used to across the south, well down into single figures. Saturday will be a mixture of sunshine and showers. Much of eastern England, eastern Scotland will stay dry, but blustery showers in the far north. And then we'll see some showers coming into Wales,